The following program is a conversation between Glenn Steckling and Renee Olsen, recorded on the 9th of April, 2023.
Okay. Well, today we are going to discuss a very widely spread question, a very justifiable question of why the truth or the knowledge of extraterrestrial visitations and extraterrestrial intelligence is withheld or subverted on our world, within our society. And Renee and I have both composed a series of discussion and interactions so that we can discuss this subject, and hopefully this will bridge some of the questions that people have, because they will always hear the same litany of why we don't want this information to impact us. And it does, and it will impact us politically, economically, socially, within our sciences and academia, within our energy sectors. It will pretty much encompass the entire actions and the predominant features of how we conduct business on this world and how we micromanage each other. And we all perpetuate this resistance, because when it comes down to it, we all say that we are happy to see the changes. Give me the knowledge, enlighten me, and start with the changes. But yet when it comes down to personal impact, then people start to waver in their word and their acknowledgement, because it affects them. And so we cannot just accuse everyone else without pointing the fingers at ourselves as well. And that is something that most people within this field do not address, because it's much easier to accuse, so-called secret societies. How secret can they be if we already know them for already hundreds of years, sometimes thousands of years? And so obviously they're not too secret. So, with this idea in mind, let us further venture within the subject and unpeel it like an onion and see what we can discover.
Yeah. I do believe that I totally agree with you that this is people want change. They ask for change. They say, "Give me reveal the secrets of extraterrestrial present civilizations." But do they really want the impact on their own lives? And that is where I think we falter as humans on this little blue planet. We speak about that we want change. We want all the to better the climate. We want to go green, and we want to do everything. But do we really want to when it hurts our pocket? We do not want to change our lives when it comes down to it.
When it comes down to it, you're right.
Yeah.
We don't want to change our lives. We don't want to change our beliefs. We don't want to change our traditions. We don't want to change anything that may impact the so-called quality of our current condition.
That's exactly what it is. We want to outwardly to have change and say, okay, we welcome all the extraterrestrial that are here, if there are several civilizations, but when people start to think about the consequences, that it will change our way of life, daily life, it will change the economy. Perhaps money will be totally useless. The energy sector will be changed. Politicians may no longer exist, so nobody will tell them what to do. There will be so many changes if the real realization that other civilizations are here,
Absolutely.
physically here, and they look like us. I do believe that they look like us is the big thing for people. Not, they can't really understand what that means in reality, because if you meet somebody on the street, is it an alien or is it not an alien? You have no idea, and that is very scary to people. Actually, it's more scary than a monster coming down the street.
Absolutely, because that they have been educated and programmed and mediaized in order to believe the monster coming down the street.
Yeah.
And academia and science has been very busy projecting their assumptions, and so that they tell you, well, on the other planet it is acid atmosphere, or pressures are so intense, and what have you.
Yeah.
None of them look at the entire process where science has embraced Darwinism and evolution so much, yet at the same token, they don't embrace it to the extent of being part of nature's principles beyond this world. So if the planet here of Earth is over 4 billion years old and has gone through a process, why aren't the other planets submitted to the same type of process? Everything may be not exactly the same, but we are telling the people, due to these obscene parameters that we wish to make them believe, that therefore anything that is coming from that has to be extreme as well. And so why don't we take a look and give first the picture of the politics and the economics of things, because we have to have people realize that what we see, whether that happens to be in Washington or in Parliament in some other country or whatever, these are politicians. This is the surface level of things. And it's like the outside peel of the onion. This is merely the sideshow, the circus entertainment, in order to keep the masses
happy,
mesmerized.
Mesmerized.
Right? Because this constant projection of conflict, and who is the right and who's the left and who's the middle of the bird, and their ideas and their values and what have you. And so this is keeping people glued to the television, and it keeps repeating in endless cycles and circles in the media and the news. And so that is part of that, is in order to keep us placated.
That's actually also what keeps people happy, because they have something to relate to, which is human. It's like they can relate to politicians and government actually in a certain way, because they also tell them, okay, this is the way it works, and then people understand it.
But what they don't realize is that as they would like to pull our strings, there are those who pull their strings. So there are many different levels of this onion, many different peels. And as the deeper we go, the more we get to the anonymous zone, where those who are moving around geopolitical events and economies, they are not known. They are not part of the sensationalism that is projected out there, whether they want to call them Freemasons or Illuminati, or what's left of the Templars or what have you. This is just, it's like a magician. Misdirection. Watch this hand while the other one does whatever it wants. And but people like that. They go for that because it keeps them entertained. But basically, the outside structure doesn't decide what is all going on in the world. What happens is that there are organizations and individuals who are running what it's called a global government. And some of our own officials are part of that global government kind of an agenda, whether it was elderly senior Bush or Clinton or any of these people. They are all part of these organizations that wish to promote a global government. And so Not that that's a bad thing if it works constructively and progressively for the unified benefit of everyone. But that's not what they're doing.
No, it doesn't.
They're manipulating things for their own benefit.
Yeah.
And so they perpetuate the variance in economies, in monetary values. They instigate mini wars in order so that we can continue to run our stock market on the perpetuation of the defense industry and all the mechanism, like my father used to say, no breakage, no makeage. So if we produce all these weapons, what do you think is going to happen to them? They don't put them so they can put them in the garage.
No.
They're going to use them. And so in order to use them, they have to instigate conflicts. And this, of course, then spurs on certain economic sectors, certain stock market stocks, certain people's retirements and portfolio incomes, and all these things. So this is part of the resistance right there, because the extraterrestrial presence will shake up the hierarchy of what we have composed. And people will say, well, why should we fight each other when they live harmoniously and have progressed much further than we have and can offer something of great value to us? And why do we want to continue this destructive nature? And so that will shake that part of it up. And from the economic standpoint, as you mentioned before, it will also rock our stock markets and rock our industries, because all of a sudden you have access to free and totally limitless energy.
Yeah. It will uproot the economic system, definitely. It will.
That's right. And so the impact of that not only affects those who control the economic structure, but all of the people who depend upon it, which is you and me and everybody else, because they all have their portfolios, individual retirement accounts. I mean, a total economic change means a huge change in realization from what we have been doing in order to start something new. Now, if we were intelligent people and beings, we would say, okay, someone has brought us a better idea. We cannot just embrace all of it at one time. We have to work gradually to phase out of what we have here, not too long because we are great procrastinators, but to phase out of the old and into the new. That, for instance, is why Kennedy, one of the reasons why John Kennedy brought and pushed the space program, because we were supposed to go from a military industrial complex and petroleum-based economy to a space and science-based economy, that because under those circumstances, there are no borders, there are no races, there are no difference in people, because it brings together the minds and functions of the entire population of the planet and abilities, because it requires that in order to go into space and go further than that. And so that was one of the pushes of the space program. And
but you of course know that could never happen, actually, not in that time. He was way too progressive for his time, because every government on earth has to be in on that, and nobody really supported that idea at that time other than he and his government.
Well, the interesting thing is that the scientific community that was involved in the space program had direct lines to each other. And the scientists admitted, we would talk with the scientists in Russia quite openly back and forth who were involved in their space program outside of the entire political structure. And so there was a certain amount of cooperation and camaraderie that developed outside the propaganda of the political spectrum.
Between science fields, it worked perfectly already then. They talked a lot between each other. They did. But could the science community affect the political system in that great an order? I don't think it can, even though it's very progressive.
The problem is funding. The funding comes from the government.
The money, where does the money come from? They come from the government. not from the science community. I wish it did, because then I think we would have progressed much faster, especially in the energy sector.
Well, yeah, and they want it that way, because that
Yeah.
way, little pieces of information have come out from the scientific community.
Yeah.
But in a whole, no, they are totally beholden to the political infrastructure of funding, and so is the education, academia, the same thing, and so consequently, they have politically wisely tied themselves to this, also from the industry standpoint, as well, and so they can allow themselves to be manipulated simply because of that. Whereas if it was totally independent, then that would be an entirely different story. NASA is primarily a government and military organization. No matter what they say, it's predominantly fielded by their personnel, and they're the ones who screen and filter everything that comes through that.
Exactly. Yeah. That is totally. But I think we have talked about before that where's the money? If there's no money, there is no science, and that is unfortunately still true. And that's also why we have not delved much deeper into the extraterrestrial question. And but you never know what will happen. But I think if there's no money in a project, no scientific minds will go to it. That is also keeping our progression back. But yeah, I can see you laugh. Go ahead.
Well, no, it brings to mind to me the statement done by Dr. Jastro from NASA Goddard, Robert Jastro, who was in charge of the Viking mission, which was the Mars mission in the 70s. And he already said at that time that they had found microbiological life on Mars. And he made a statement that said that scientists don't like to be exposed at being wrong.
No.
Because we have developed a reputation system. We would think that science would be exactly the opposite. That science would be revealing more all the time. And therefore, we have to revise our earlier estimates based on the new accumulation of knowledge that happens continually. Change is a matter of natural progression. There's nothing in the universe that is stagnant or regressive. Everything moves forward. And so when you resist that change, that's when you get a great deal of friction. And so that friction translates into many different avenues. But yes, so when we look at this, we can see that from the political standpoint and the connection to economies transgresses into the scientific and also into the academic communities, because we are based on a monetary system. And as long as we are beholden to that, then the truth has less and less likelihood of being spoken, unless you are part of a system that isn't dependent upon that. And that comes out to be usually not huge organizations, but more the individual. And that's what you've had over time. Some scientists have stepped out of that predominant attachment and have been more open with information or their thoughts and what have you once they've retired, or once a certain program evaporates and is no longer.
Maybe they start their own business, then they suddenly can speak their mind, right, about how it was when they were inside that.
That's to a certain degree, because you can remember that they are still
also dependent on the money.
Well, also like our military officers, they are beholden to secrecy acts and signed paper that they cannot divulge certain things. These are I have to laugh sometimes, because I've heard in this UFO community, somebody suddenly comes out and says, well, I used to keep these secrets, but now, I can talk because I'm not in there anymore, or there's a statute of limitations, which is absolutely nonsense. When you sign these papers, that's for life.
For life. Yeah, that's for life. Exactly.
And so, and that's nothing more than bait in order to get you to say, well, this person may have something more of value to say. And to me, that is more subject to examination, because yeah, when you know that you can only say so much, and how you say it, and so consequently you have to be aware of the certain limitations. Like I mentioned,
Yeah.
in the new book, there's a statute on a law statute on the books that says that if you if you talk about or report UFOs, you can be subjected to tens of thousands of dollars of fines and also prison.
Yeah.
And how can you justify that if, according to the officials, these things do not exist?
Yeah.
And I also gave you that clip about the one airline captain that reported in the 70s a UFO to NORAD, and they suspended him from flying and suspended him from pay for almost an entire year.
Yeah.
And so that doesn't take, many of the other ones to see that.
No.
And so consequently, it's not difficult to understand how there is a certain amount of resistance and a willingness to maintain silence, because they are making, the individual pay the price of that. And that is a wide spectrum that's covers science, military, civilian, everything. It's we have founded a system where we are basically perpetuating a constant state of fear.
Yeah.
That fear sets up a inner apprehension, and that inner apprehension prevents us from first moving forward, secondly to be part of some of that, and not be faced with persecution. And I think in today's world, we see that politics is manipulating law so that they can persecute their political enemies. I mean, it's not like that is a new idea. They've been doing that for thousands of years.
They have, yes.
So, but the idea here is that you can understand some of the reluctance in some cases, that people just don't blurt out everything they know, because that can have consequences. And if you're willing to, if you're willing to be subjected to that, then that's a different story.
Yeah, because everybody, before speaking inside academia or science or whatever, they have to think about the consequences, and that is what is holding people back. I think that is you're totally correct in that. But that is that a good way to live, and is that a good way to have progression as a species?
No, it's not possible.
It's limiting us. We are limiting ourselves because we are afraid of the economic consequences, and maybe also even the religious consequences if we are part of a religion, right? And from society in general, the social ramifications of speaking out. There are so many things, and I'm sure that you're going to talk about some of that, Glenn. So I'm handing it over to you again.
We have mentioned the religious aspect of things, and of course, we have been taught and promoted, that God is only here, and or in some place called heaven or hell, which is you can look historically and find out that it was the Egyptian priests who had composed the notion of heaven and hell. It was not in earlier religions, and it was adopted then by subsequent religions in order to maintain control of the masses. But the idea that the religions themselves are against this is to some part not true. If you look to Hinduism and Buddhism and Christianity, they all talk about other inhabited worlds. Some of them verbatim in their scriptures. And so for instance, like Jesus said, in my Father's house are many mansions. Others are much more direct, like Buddhists. There was direct quotes from other worlds. And also Greek, and so it's not
but these things are not put forward by religion. They are just stated in the books or the writings, but they are not promoted as such. Are they?
They're not given as sermons in order
No,
to remind the people, because they
no.
have to keep, when they sermonize, they have to keep the, once again, the public mesmerized.
Yeah.
And in order to maintain, to make them come together for a period of concentration, because they know the public has, you know, a 20-minute concentration span. And
Sure.
so they are limiting other things in order to maintain a certain focus. But if you look at this thing here, for instance, it says here, Vatican has eye on UFOs. And it says here that the Reverend Foons, who directs the Vatican Observatory, says that the extraterrestrial is my brother, and that he says that it shows that the magnanimity of God is much greater than what we originally tried to make just for us, but everywhere. When you look at it, and the creation is through the cosmos, then it brings this. He says it does not conflict or contradict our faith, because we cannot put limits on God's creative freedom. And so it's not that they don't understand that. And the other one here, this also comes from a Presbyterian pastor, and it talks about that UFOs are real and they have key religious significance. And he says that he was a doctorate in the University of Edinburgh in Scotland, and you know, it shows that if governments weren't lying or denying UFOs exist, we would have a religious revolution starting already 40 years ago. And this is from the Reverend Downing, and it talks about how and then it says how contact with other space beings will change us. World leaders will realize that national differences are meaningless when we set aside or beside a limitless universe. Man will no longer consider going to war over strips of land. How can you fight with your neighbor when together you both face the tremendous challenge of the universe? And it goes on to a much deeper in depth discussion of that. So
when was that written? Can you remember?
this was written in 1978, and the
Yeah.
other one in 1989.
Yeah.
And then the Vatican article was 2008.
Okay, that's a new one. Yeah, but the other
More,
ones,
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So,
yeah.
so the idea here is that the resistance, yes, there is organized resistance to the change of the structure of any religion.
Yeah.
Because they have worked tenaciously to gain control over their sector of the masses.
Yeah.
And this is not only from the belief standpoint, but from the economic standpoint and the impact, that so that they can boast on having billions upon converts or what have you. And so there's a certain amount of resistance within that structure. If that leadership to change would address that, then that would be a big difference. And that's why George went and delivered that space message, the sealed message from the space people, to Pope John the 23rd, from whom he got the golden medal from, for acknowledging his work and his contribution. And that Pope was going to, as you look at the medal, it says from two there should be one, or basically unification of the church between the Roman Catholic and the Orthodox Catholic, in order to bring together a more consistent message and a more consistent leadership for the people whom they are being authoritative over.
Yeah.
And so that needs to come about. Well, that never happened because, of course, the Pope passed away 2 weeks later, and some say under suspicious circumstances, but that is another story. But the idea here is that all religions guard their domination, and are multiplied over and over again in order to once again affect politics and have an economic imprint.
Yeah.
If you have to settle lawsuits against you to the tune of $4 billion, like the Roman Catholic Church had to, think about how much that money is to the people from whom they took it out of their pockets.
Oh yeah.
Right. And
Yeah.
so and they settle and say, okay, adios to 4 billion. Can you imagine what that money could do for those who really are in need?
Yeah.
And so the hypocrisy is quite fluent.
You know, they are church for the needy, right? But they take the money from the needy, and that is quite interesting. It's an interesting structure of humanity, the churches in general. But I, of course, I also think that you know, if the churches say, okay, we accept that there are extraterrestrial life and that it's you know, many mansions of God's creation, it is more a confirmation that their religion is the right one, but there are just many other places that religion is also good, since God has created life anywhere else. So ET life is proof that God is creating life. So it confirms their story to the people. So they maintain the power over the people. They don't really say, okay, we relinquish the power, and you're free to think what you want. No. Do you believe that they would ever do that in churches? No.
Well, and so that brings us to the most volatile of this entire thing, is that it is the people ourselves. I mean, honestly, we need to look in the mirror, because like I said before, while we all say hippie hooray, you know, we'll take the change, or tell us.
Yeah.
When it personally affects you yourself and your life and your infrastructure and your belief system and your pocketbook and your traditions,
it rocks you solidly.
Then all of a sudden this grand proclamation of how much we want to be told the truth gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And so people don't look at that too much. Think about it. Think about if you have no countries, if you have no borders, and of people that are each taking care of their own business. That doesn't mean that you get to run from one place to the next in order to take advantage of somebody else's hard work and labor. That means that you have a global effort in order to contribute to a betterment of society. And since we have those who think they're entitled without having to contribute, or those we have all kinds of excuses. And so they want to receive, but they don't want to give.
Exactly.
And so until we reach a level of understanding, when we understand if we all give some, then we all get some. But then we have to enforce that we all give some. And you cannot just let certain denominations or certain aspects of the population slide because of that. Because progression means that you all progress together. You don't have to necessarily be exactly at the same level at the same time. That's not possible. We are all in different states of expression and understanding.
Yeah, but I do believe that to progress is also to understand what is going to happen. Right? It's to understand the progression, why it has to happen. I do believe so. So understanding is a big part of it.
That's right. And so then we have to realistically place ourselves into the shoes of those who come to visit us. Because they have been observing us for many thousands of years. But even if they took a snapshot of to this week and they looked at us, they understand all these many different facets to how we have composed our existence on this planet. And that's what we can call it, existence, because it's not life,
No,
it's existence,
it
what we
is. We
practice.
exist. We exist
We
here. Yeah.
exist.
Yeah.
And so consequently, they look at that and they say, well, how much can we responsibly divulge in order to bring about some progress without, throwing the people out of the boat, so to speak, because they can't comprehend it all.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a teacher. It's like you start the first day of school and you have a whole classroom full of students, and before the day is out, you will have been already to be able to identify which are the students, which are the goof off, which are the ones don't understand, which are the, and so on. You divide it up like any crowd when you go out and give a presentation or a lecture somewhere.
Yeah.
You're dealing with the same diversity in mental comprehension and expression as anywhere else.
Yeah.
So you then have to decide, what can I give so that it doesn't take it to an extreme or destructive nature?
Yeah.
All right. So when we
Yeah,
see,
it needs to bring about change of thought, but not much more than that in the beginning, I think.
that's right.
Yeah.
And so it's an immense responsibility that they
Oh, yeah.
have. So people always say, well, why don't they just mass land, and that way the
No.
cat's out of the bag, and then and all of that. I can't think of a quicker way upon which the people of this world would unite in aggression
Yeah.
than that. We would have instantaneously the militaries quadring off and perimeterizing anywhere where the ships land,
Yeah.
or anything that they say. People they've been so hypnotized by sci-fi that they think somebody's going to eat them or have sex with them or whatever the heck.
Yeah.
And so we have worked tenaciously ourselves in order to poison the water, so to speak,
Yeah.
to make it very difficult. So it is not an easy thing, and it's not a simple thing. And while we like to point the finger everywhere else, we really have to point the finger at ourselves as well. Like I told you earlier, we spoke briefly about tradition and how people identify themselves to be the traditional value of where they come from. Let's say, for instance, I came from Spain or from Italy, so therefore I'm Italian or Spanish, which means that I speak that language and I eat certain foods that are indigenous to those societies and all those things. And they look at themselves and say, that's who I am.
Yeah.
But in reality,
Yeah.
that's not who you are at all.
No.
That's only the circumstances of the outer shell in which you were born into.
Yeah.
But who you are, the soul within you, has no countries and boundaries and statutes and limitations and all these other things. But that's a harder question to answer and surmise. Who am I inside, and not just the peripheral? Because that's an easy thing to do and say, okay, I'm this, and this, or
Yeah.
I'm Roman Catholic, or I'm Hindu, I'm, whatever, Islamic or whatever. But that's not who you are.
No.
And so we have been hypnotized into identifying that way. And that's how it is easy to manipulate peoples, because that way you can start pointing the fingers and say, look, they're that, let's go kill them.
Yeah.
Like they did to the Cathars, 200,000 of them. They killed
Yeah.
man, woman, child, and beast. And the bishop in charge said, well, we'll kill them all and let God sort them out.
Yeah.
I mean, that's pretty demonic when you think about it.
Oh, it is. Yes.
And not heavenly, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And so consequently, we have to go about an evaluation within ourselves and to determine the changes that we are willing to make. I never forget an article that George Adamski wrote in the 1930s. It's called "Who Lives in This House of Clay?" And so it talks about the inner part of you, the consciousness part of you, which is eternal. And And so when people look at these things and say, oh, well, my God, um, all of these things start to rattle the confidence and the security of the masses, because there are numerous changes within each one structure. And so once again, we have to go about it in a logical and rational manner. But at the same token, we have to be very careful, because what is happening today is these inner governments that are working world events have their own micro agenda, and they believe that holding back progress to the highest extent possible is slowing all of this down. It keeps them longer and longer in power, keeps them longer and longer within the wealth structure. And so consequently, we have to make sure that we don't become so apathetic or so overcautious that we don't embrace the change. Like JFK used to say, he loved the Irish saying, when the young fellows came to the wall that they thought was too high to climb, they took their caps off and threw them over the wall. And therefore, they had to figure out a way to climb that wall in order to get their hats back.
Yeah.
And sometimes we have to do that. We have to throw our hat over the wall in order to incentivize us to go after it. And then we become much more thoughtful, much more inventive, much more intuitive in order to how to overcome the challenge, so that when we get to the other side of the wall, we have been able to embrace, through the effort it took to get there, a betterment of expression. We learned something. And that's basically what it comes down to.
Like I said, the biggest, I think the most important part of being human is to be curious. And it is, otherwise you will not discover anything new. You have to be curious about your circumstances.
Even nature.
Yeah.
Look at nature.
Yeah.
I mean, curiosity is also embedded with them. When I let my dog go out, he is curious on what goes on out there.
Oh, yeah.
He goes and he looks and sees the people walk by, and he lays there and listens to the birds. He is forever, I wouldn't say concentrated, but part of this environment of curiosity, because that's how they learn, and that's how we learn. We are embedded with that curiosity and that willingness to, and the desire to explore in order to expand our understanding. Yeah. We find that the longer we stay marginalized, and the longer we stay withheld or enclosed, the longer we become, the more ignorant we become, because there is no outside thought that goes to rattling our presumptions. If somebody doesn't question what you think and what you're doing, eventually you don't question what you're thinking, what you're doing, and you just do it because it was done. Well, that's tradition.
That's called apathy.
Well, it's often called tradition, because grandmother did it this way, then I have to do it that way. My first question is why? Yeah.
Why do we have to do it the way that they did? No, there could be another way of thinking about it. Let's curiosity again, and understanding of why, question why you are here and what you're doing. That is important. I think that that we understand why we do what we do every day. Why do we go to work? What is the purpose of us working? Do we want to do something else? We need to understand the way we function as humans. I think that's how we can also affect the rest of our populations. If we understand what we are.
Mm-hmm. But that means that you have to be introspective of yourself. And a lot of people don't want to be that, because they don't want to have to face that question. Who am I? What am I doing? And why am I doing it? Because when you do that, then you can't just,
you have to answer that. You have to answer those questions.
You can't do whatever you want mindlessly, so to speak, just because that doesn't exist. Because you create yourself a great deal of so-called karma as well as this, because you just do things haphazardly without any thought
Yeah,
to it.
yeah.
So when we look at this whole reason why the extraterrestrial question is not openly embraced,
And
it is
openly
for
discussed, you know.
openly discussed.
Do we even hear people discuss it? Not really. So
Not really.
yeah,
No, because we have so busily trying to confuse it and negate it and squash it, that we don't get to that part of the question.
yeah,
If you're told that it doesn't exist and it cannot exist, and believe what we tell you, then therefore you never get to the second part of the question, because then you don't think about, well, if there's other intelligent civilizations and expressions of being, then how did they get there? Where did they come from? Where did we come from?
hold that thought, because I have some contacts inside the scientific community in Denmark, and I just put the questions to them, some questions, and I say, okay, do you understand, how did life begin? They haven't. They think they are making major steps forward in scientific, progression, which I believe they do not. We haven't defined what life is. True progression cannot happen until we could document and create life, I think. So one cell being able to reproduce itself without external input, meaning warm or sugar or whatever. But do we understand how it began? No, we do not. Exobiologists do not know at present time. And they are not asking the question, how did it begin? And that is why we need to study the universe up close, just like the ET does. Go there to find out. And that is what we need to do, I think. And I do believe some scientific people are beginning to see that, because they live in a world where they're not getting answers to their questions. Because they can't, because nobody is studying it. That's interesting.
Because we don't admit to the fact that there cannot be nothing. That doesn't exist.
Nothing does not exist.
Even nothing would have to have something to support it in order to be nothing.
Yeah, so because how did it come into existence?
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah.
So when we used to say that the atom was the smallest structure, that was only a misnomer until we invented the electron microscope, and we found out that there are quarks and electrons and neutrons and everything else. But the next question comes then, what composes that? Yeah. And what is yet smaller that composes that? It goes on to infinity, because there always has to be something in order to have made something else.
Yeah.
And that is a very hard concept for science to embrace, infinity. Yeah. They don't want to know it. Their mind balks at that.
Yeah. That's the same as the creation of the universe, because how did something come from nothing? There must have been something before, right?
Right. What brought about the Big Bang? There had to be elements that came together in order to produce the explosive nature, in order to create that so-called anomaly, which actually never existed. Yeah. And so consequently, we limit ourselves also.
Oh, yes.
Within the boundaries of it's sort of like a zoo. We're in a boundary area and fences, and we limit ourselves to that. And if anything is outside of that, we don't want to see that, or we don't want to acknowledge it. Yeah. And therefore we are denying ourselves our own recognition and our own progress. And so every one of these institutions, and there are some good ones and there are some people that do good work, we cannot just categorize everything and everyone as holding us back, because they're obviously, we couldn't sit here and discuss this situation if we didn't have information that would allow us to do that. It looks at the article that I have right here. UFOs have finally gone mainstream. The UFO community is not thrilled. Of course they wouldn't be thrilled, because if the truth comes out, 95% of them would be out of business.
But isn't that interesting that the UFO community is the biggest threat to the revelations, right? Oh, yes. Man. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. And that's because we don't do things for the benefit of everyone.
No.
We do often these things for the benefit of ourselves,
Yeah.
and then right
Our own
away
egos, our own
that
egos.
changes the entire manifestation and the contours of everything. And so when people look to the heavens and there have been more UFO reports here in the last year that I can think of. I mean, so many of my former pilot compatriots have reported them over the Pacific Ocean, and just February, a few months ago, over in the middle of the night over mainland USA, 5 different airline crews from 5 different airplanes reported it or seeing it, and some of them reported it because there's still that stigma. But I think there's more and more observations going on, because to me, the first stage of this is to show the people their existence.
Yeah.
So, for instance, when you see one of these crafts or you see something in the sky, it automatically uplifts you to the thought of who and what they are.
Yeah.
And so therefore, and then it opens up the next door. Where do they come from? How do they express themselves? How do they live? What have they learned?
Yeah.
And so to me, the observation is always a rekindling of the entire subject, because then it tries to bring to the awareness of people the subject itself. And that to me is the first step.
Yeah.
And
it
then
actually begins the progression, I think.
Right.
Just by seeing something you cannot explain. Your curiosity want to know what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And that, is the first step of progression, isn't it?
Well, they did it in biblical times. They did it in certain times of history. I mean, if you look at medieval times, there are paintings of people sitting inside, the very famous one, sitting inside this device flying through the sky, the mural on the wall.
Yeah.
We can go into the archaeological or anthropological thing for endless amount of time. But the idea is in the late 40s and 50s, they came in great numbers in order to rattle our cage, so to speak, to start this process. And they found out that for the most part, we did a 180 and tried to do everything we could to deny it.
Yeah.
So I think that being intelligent beings and intelligent thinking, they thought, well, okay, maybe the people here are not ready for it yet, so we'll back off for a while. For them, well, what's the big deal? 30, 40 years means nothing to them. And geologically, that's not even a grain of sand in the geological clock. And so they figure maybe they'll come back later and see if we have come to better understanding and a little bit more realization. Are we willing to take that step? Because you can't graduate from one class to the next one until you have fulfilled the requirements of where you were at. So I think we may be getting a bit more into that sector. But as we discussed on earlier recordings, the disclosure part will be highly censored and highly resistant to it. And so, but so and I want to make sure that people don't get so pulled into the mystical side of this, that they say, well, the Illuminati or these so-called secret societies. First of all, like I mentioned before, they're not secret because you've known about them for hundreds of years, if not thousands, right? So, but when we look at the conditions upon the society during those particular times, there was a great deal of bias, there was a great deal of persecution, and people of different thinking or understanding had to meet in secret or clandestine.
To exchange information, basic information even,
That's otherwise they were burned in the stake like
exactly.
Bruno.
The churches were after them if they were just outside the norm or talked differently, perhaps even about how the human body worked, which was not accepted. So Yeah, like I told you also, the many artists were definitely
Yes.
part of these so-called secret societies or social groups which met and discussed things of great importance to progression at that time.
Yeah, 16
Act-
members of the signers of the Constitution were
Yeah,
Freemasons,
yeah, they were.
and none of them caused us great problem or issue. In fact, they are great educators themselves,
Yeah,
and so, but we have to understand that those were the norms of the time. So we have to
yeah.
understand that this is how these little enclaves of different thinking protected themselves.
And
And
it
it's not
was,
any,
and it was not actually to protect knowledge for the few or about keeping secrets. It was about informing the same people as themselves about the state of affairs, actually.
yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So sorry, continued.
No, 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 that's fine. I mean,
Yeah,
that's a perfect,
yeah.
perfect point. And so,
It was always to escape the wrath of the church or the clergy or the rulers. It was
or the
always to
rulers,
get
because
away.
they were combined. The
Yeah,
church and
they were.
and the
Yeah,
aristocracy and the monarchs were all part
yeah.
of the same
It
group,
was the same thing. Yeah,
as we know from the persecution of the Templars there,
yeah,
from Philip the Fair
yeah.
and the Pope,
So
wanted
as
the
such, they were not. They I would call them groups of people who met in secret,
Yes, yes.
and
And
that
that
was
doesn't mean that they had
no,
anything nasty or
no,
nefarious against any of the rest of the people.
no.
Once again, they were maintaining information, make sure that it did not get buried
Yeah,
or totally wiped out,
yeah,
and made sure that it was circulated so that it could go about its natural cycle, which
yeah,
it has as well. So I really encourage the people not to get too pulled into that, because
yeah.
we love a good mystery, and that's
Oh yeah.
okay, but not where it doesn't apply.
No.
And so, and too many media outlets and too many shows and programs are totally centered upon those organizations in order to people for to get, oh boy,
Yeah,
what did they
it's
know
been
that I
made into
didn't?
a mystery where there is no mystery, actually.
That's right,
Yeah,
right.
yeah. It was a totally different, social background why these groups were made.
Yeah,
There was a pertinent need for them, actually, unless people would have to be killed for their knowledge. That was actually the things that could happen to people who was too forward in their thinking for the
that's
time.
right.
Yeah,
That's right.
yeah.
That's
And
it. So,
yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
But that is a small thing about what's happening to our science society. Actually, if you speak out of line about something, what is happening? You are getting the social repercussions, right?
Sure, you get
And the same as
ostracized from those
pilots.
communities.
Yeah, and there's
Mm-hmm.
pilots who report UFOs or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There is a social. They will be punished socially or economically. That's one way to do it nowadays to keep people in
Yeah,
line, right?
yeah, well, that's it, and it works pretty effectively. There's some
It
of
does.
us who are not willingly part of the flock of sheep, and we all stand out a little bit.
Yeah,
And so, but then you have to do so wisely,
yeah.
and not this isn't a crusade, and this isn't
No,
some kind of uh, you know some kind of something that you're going out and proclaiming and making something of a name out of yourself for. No, that's not what this is supposed to be about. And you have to do things intelligently,
yeah,
and give a certain amount of information intelligently. And we both know from our own individual experiences that we are very cognizant of what we say and we don't say, and when we say it.
yeah. And it's information, and it's not about sensationalizing thing. It is not about sensation. It's about informing. I think
Yes,
that is the
yes.
main thing and the main purpose. Then, do you want to make a final statement, or do you think we have covered the subject? I think we have actually.
I think we've covered the subject, and I'm sure you will get some input from people that
Yeah,
will have questions about what we discussed, or maybe to expand upon, or hopefully not to have to worry about clarifying too much. I try to make things as simple and as
Yeah, I
straightforward as
think
possible.
you did good.
And so we need to, like I said, we need to think intelligently, and remember, once again, to have contact, you have to prove yourself trustworthy.
Yeah,
I mean, how many people would sell out whom and what they know if the enticement was big enough? Like I told you, my father
yeah,
was offered by the
yeah,
intelligence community $1 million tax-free in any account he wanted if he would denounce George, and he told him to kiss his behind.
yeah,
And so the idea is that you have to be dependable, reliable, trustworthy, and most people would sell out if the enticement is
yeah. It's
big
big enough.
enough.
Yeah,
And they're looking for those who don't sell out, who
yeah,
will not divulge who they are. They leave that to them to do. If a
yeah,
space person comes to me and wants to have a conversation, oh, I'm all ears, absolutely.
yeah,
But I don't then go on the air the next day and say, guess what? I had this, this so-and-so came to see me, and this is how he looks like. I took a phone picture, because I don't need validation from everybody else. Whether
no,
you believe it or not is immaterial to me,
yeah, exactly.
right?
Yeah,
And so when people say, can you tell us how a space person looks? And you say, well, it looks like you and I,
yeah, no
then
different.
they have not only a problem with that,
Yeah,
but they are uneasy, because then once again, the person sitting right next to them, or the one who's standing with opposite them in the subway or whatever, can be one of them. Well,
yeah,
why is that such a threat? I'd be more worried about other threats standing in the subway than I would a
yeah,
space person. That's for
yeah,
sure.
yeah,
It's
definitely.
so it's so um and so when you honor that and you prove that
Yeah,
you you are worthy of their confidence, then you are opening the door to more things.
yeah,
And so I think that that is something that people should think about.
yeah. Good ending, Glenn. And I think we will call it a day here with the recording. Thanks a
Okay.
lot. Thanks.
All right.